We have a tradition of going to buffet for my birthday dinner. As I got older, it became harder to get my small family together for a meal. My brother left for school and my parents both got pretty into their jobs. When the day came, I got lucky and my brother came back for a weekend. My parents far busy, but promised we could do dinner later with just them, and I accepted the offer. If I went out with them later, I could go with my brother now, so I got 2 birthday dinners. I picked out the place I wanted to eat at. There was a Chinese buffet pretty close by that I loved. The food was great and they had some aquariums with massive koi inside for people to watch while they ate. The place looked beautiful as well, the entire restaurant covered in red and gold, making me wonder why it wasn't a more popular spot. The hostess silently directed us to an empty table. Besides the workers, we were the only ones inside. For how good the food was, I felt bad that this place wasn't packed. We got our drinks and went to load up our plates. The dinner was fairly normal for a while. I roasted my brother in the way only a little sister could. He pretended to be annoyed but had fun hanging out after being away for so many months. We tried to stay quiet though so we wouldn't disrupt the server's slow night shift. I swore I needed to come by this restaurant more often after eating 2 plates of different meat dishes. The food had no reason being this good. Soon I started to get full, leaving a few pieces of mushrooms and noodles on my plate. My brother had half a slice of cake on his. We sat and talked for a few more minutes, waiting for our stomach to settle before attempting to clean the last few bites. As we talked, someone else came in and sat at a table near ours. I glanced over at him, unable to help myself. I've never seen a person like him before. His skin dark, but hair golden. His eyes a bright blue, almost white. It made them look fake, and I didn't know why someone would wear colored contacts to go out alone for dinner. The waitstaff suddenly started to act weird. They whispered something to the man sitting down and nodded towards us. I met my brother's eyes to see if he wanted to leave or stay to watch what this was all about. The man said something in a low voice I couldn't make out and waved off the waiter's concerns. The waiter gave us an almost scared look for half a second, then hurried away. I looked around to see that almost everyone working in the place suddenly started to hover nearby. The man dressed in a dark red vest with gold pinstripe threads. His shirt buttoned up all the way to his chin, making his neck look stiff. He rolled up his shirt sleeves to the elbows in such a neat way and buttoned them in place with glittering golden buttons. We both did our best to not stare, finding it hard. He didn't seem to notice the other 2 people looking at him. The stranger sat stiff and proper, waiting for something. The server came over with 2 plates in his hands, piled with stir-fried rice and some sweet and sour chicken. I gave my brother another look, wondering who this guy was that made him so important a buffet server would bring food to him. The plates were set down and the man started to eat, then more servers came over. My mouth dropped open as more plates were set down. Soon the entire table was covered with dishes overloaded with different kinds of food. I couldn't finish even a plate and a half of what had been placed down in front of this man. Did this guy have any friends coming by? No. The table he sat at could only hold 4 people. This was way more food than what 4 people could eat. In the time the plates had been set down, the man finished the first 2. He set the cleared plate aside and the server scooped them up for more to be set down in their place. This man wasn't big. He looked rail thin, and yet he already ate more than what myself and my brother did in 2 minutes after sitting down. We should have paid our bill and left, but we sat in our seats transfixed at the sight before us. We no longer tried to hide staring at this man eating. Another 4 plates set aside, and the servers were sweating. They were acting as if a wild animal came inside but needed to act professional serving it. The music that played over some sort of hidden system cut out, letting us hear the sounds of his cutlery against his plates and faintly a dishwasher running somewhere in the kitchen. Oddly enough, the man wasn't making any disgusting chewing sounds. Well, until he got to the shrimp plate. The restaurant served whole shrimp with the head still attached. I've never tried eating them before. The man didn't take the heads off, he just shoved the whole thing in his mouth and I could hear the shells crunching as he chewed. I already lost track of how much food he'd already eaten. I caught my brother's eyes again and he mouthed the silent, "What the f***?" His face pale and I assumed my own expression was the same look of horror. The strange man got to a place of some sweet and sour short ribs. They honestly were my favorite things served at the restaurant, and I tensed up waiting to see if he ate them the same way he ate the shrimp. Shells were one thing, but bones? There was no way he was going to eat the bones. We both stared, mouths open, as he ate through the pile with no issue at all, bones and all. The sound of his teeth cracking against the ribs, the only thing echoing inside the restaurant. This was insane. There was no way someone could eat like this. We had a chance to just leave. I doubted the owners would care if we fled without paying our bill by then. There was no way to figure out how much he ate with all the empty plates being taken away. We lost track of time, but I think it wasn't very long. This man ate more than what some people did in 6 months in under an hour. Finally, all the plates were removed and replaced by clean, empty ones covering his table. He turned his head to meet our gazes. I nearly screamed, having the set of bright eyes on us. We both froze, unable to move when he stood up, adjusting his vest. Even after eating so much, he didn't make a mess. No drips of sauce on his vest or at the corners of his mouth. He took the few steps to come over to our table, a smile on his face that made my body want to fold into itself. He stopped and placed a hand on the back of my chair, trying to look as friendly as possible. I wanted to scream. I looked up at my brother, silently begging him to do something. His hand went to his butter knife, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. If this man tried anything to his little sister, he might attack him. Thank God for older brothers. I am sorry you both needed to witness all of that. It must have been unnerving for you. But this restaurant had a wonderful dessert prepared for me tonight, and I needed to come in right away. The stranger spoke, his voice sweet and with the hint of a southern accent. You ate the bones, I choked out, unable to say anything else. Oh yes, I am able to digest things like that. One should always clean their plates. It's an insult to the chefs and the food otherwise, he said, and his eyes fell on our plates. We still had a few things left over. I started to sweat, my chest getting tight, waiting for him to do something. My mind going crazy with thoughts of what the hell this man really was and what he would do to us for not finishing our meals. But I suppose a few pieces left behind isn't the end of the world. After all, you did see something a bit strange. It's understandable to not finish your dinner with your stomach upset. I'll pay for your meals as an apology. I do know that my eating habits are a bit different from your own, he said, his friendly tone never wavering. I sighed and my brother relaxed his grip on the knife. I wanted to leave and nearly did so when I saw his face twist into horror. He saw something before I did, and I heard a sound of muffled screaming. I tensed again, praying that if I didn't move, nothing would happen. The sound got closer, and out of the corner of my eyes, I saw the servers dragging a bound man through the empty dining room. He struggled harder when he got closer to the table of empty plates. His pleas for help hidden under the cloth stuffed in his mouth and wrapped around his head. Oh, there's my special dessert now. This one was found trying to climb into a window of a child in the dead of night. It seems that wasn't the first time he's done so, just the first time he was caught. My dinner threatened to come back up hearing those words. I let myself watch the servers place the struggling bound man on the table and on the plates. He broke a few as they forced him still. He kicked and thrashed, causing some of the broken shards to cut his clothing. The stranger didn't mind. He turned from our table to go back to his with a new meal. I only stayed long enough to watch the stranger's mouth literally unhinge from his jaw. I knew he wouldn't eat his dessert as neat and proper as he did with his dinner. I grabbed my brother by the wrist and dragged him out of that place, letting out a small scream when I heard the first sounds of the stranger biting down. We got into his car and got the hell out of there, neither of us speaking. We didn't even notice my brother accidentally stole the butter knife until we got back home. We threw it out, not wanting the thing in the house. It took hours for either of us to finally speak to each other. Do you want to go to the movies instead of dinner for your birthday next year? My brother asked in a shaking voice. I nodded, agreeing with him. It sucks that I could never eat at that restaurant again. I really like their sweet and sour short ribs.
They say that 99.9% of the internet is not accessible to traditional browsers. The world that lives beneath what we see when we visit the dark web contains things which defy normal understanding. It has become a breeding ground to all of man's most perverse and dark fantasies. It's a place where chaos reigns supreme. My mother is not an extremely savvy internet user. In fact, most of the time she has little to no idea what she's doing on there. If she is in someone else's YouTube account or Gmail, she often does what she is trying to do without paying attention to whose credentials she is using. Can you blame her, though? Her generation didn't grow up with computers. They are seriously disadvantaged when it comes to that kind of stuff. I, on the other hand, somewhat pride myself on being knowledgeable about computers and the internet. I don't know how I would live my life without the opportunities it affords me. One could easily assume that I would be someone who would take an interest in the dark web. And believe me, it's not for the faint of heart. Now the thing is that I am very careful with what I do. I use a great VPN service, and I know what I can and can't click on in order not to expose my IP address to anyone. After years of doing this, though, I did, however, become a bit too careless, and it just so happens that the time I did, I was on my mom's computer. I was hanging with my family during the holidays, and I got into an argument with my little brother Tommy about a certain listing that I had seen on a dark net market search. He's always been a bit of a sheltered kid, considering he has a cleft lip and my parents baby him like a toddler. So I figured it was my responsibility to show him some of the real world every once in a while. I had told him about this listing for a clown that you could hire for birthday parties that was, for some reason, being advertised on the dark web, and he, of course, didn't believe me. So I showed him the listing, and we read about how the clown would provide your party with an exceptional experience, one that you would likely never forget. Considering my knowledge of the dark web, I was pretty sure it was not an experience you would want to remember. After I showed him, I got distracted and went about my business doing other things. Somehow, though, I left my browser window open on my mom's computer. This was hands down the most careless slip-up of my life, one that I will likely never live down. After I was done on there, she used the laptop and, thinking that the clown was something my little brother wanted to do for his birthday, she went ahead and paid for him to come visit the house. After I found out what she had done, we tried to cancel it, but I guess it didn't work because that weekend a clown car pulled up out front of our house for Tommy's birthday. Out of the car stepped an old man in traditional clown makeup with these pale, bluish-white eyes like those of a blind person. Yet, he seemed to be able to walk up the driveway totally fine. My mom was very freaked out and had my dad go meet him in the driveway. When my dad approached him, he tried to shake his hand, but instead, the clown just immediately pulled out 3 juggling balls and started tossing them up effortlessly. My dad stared at him for a moment in awe, then began to guide him around the side yard into the back, where the rest of the party guests were. I was definitely a bit worried, so I went to the backyard, and the clown was already setting up for a magic show. The guy looked freaky as hell, but everyone in the crowd seemed okay with it, so I supposed I was being too judgmental and should just let him do his show. Plus, he had a name tag that said Noisy, and considering that he hadn't said a word the whole time, I thought that was pretty funny. For the first trick, Noisy took out a quarter, and he pretended like it disappeared in his hand. Then, he reached around the back of his head and pulled the quarter out from behind his ear. It was a pretty basic trick, but he kept going with it. He pulled out quarter after quarter from behind his ear until there was a pile of change at least a few inches high on the ground beside him. Everyone in the yard seemed impressed when they saw this. It was really an incredible trick. Then he picked up the pile of change off the ground and put it in his shirt. Then he held the shirt up with his 2 fingers and launched the coins up into the air. Only nothing flew out. The change had totally disappeared, and in its place, a bunny rabbit popped out. The crowd really got into this. A few of them even got up and started putting money into his tip jar. Then, Noisy extended his hand, and pointed to Tommy. Tommy smiled, excited to have been acknowledged, and stepped up. Noisy then pulled out one of those huge bubble-making wands and had Tommy stand in this round tray of soap on the ground. Noisy then lowered the wand over Tommy and lifted it back up quickly and covered him in a gigantic bubble. This was not an ordinary bubble, though. It would not pop no matter what. Tommy would hit the side of it and it wouldn't break. Everyone in the audience stared at this speechless. Clearly, they were watching something that wasn't possible occurring before their eyes. After a few seconds of being trapped inside, Tommy started to freak out and thrash against the side of the bubble. He began screaming and crying, panicking. "Hey, let him out!" my dad yelled as he started approaching the clown. Noisy then looked over at him and put his fingers to his lips, shushing him. He then lifted the wand up above my brother's head and quickly brought it down over him. The bubble instantly disappeared, and so did Tommy. Frantic, my dad charged Noisy, but just before he could get to him, the clown brought the bubble wand down over himself and vanished as well. My dad screamed frantically, looking all over for the two of them. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the crowd began to stand up and try to help my dad look for them. Then, we heard a car start up in the driveway. Several of us sprinted to the front yard and saw the clown car pulling out and taking off down the street. My dad and I, along with several others, got into our cars and peeled out, chasing after him. Then, the clown car turned a corner, and by the time we got there, it had vanished. Upon the realization that we had lost him, my dad immediately broke down in tears, screaming and pounding on the steering wheel. I had never seen him get like that before, and I knew it was my fault. The following weeks were some of the worst I had ever experienced. Constant contact with the police and interviews, where everyone was relentlessly asking me about why I was on the dark web and what I knew about my little brother's disappearance. I honestly feel like I was lucky they didn't pin the entire thing on me and just close the case. I didn't stop going on the dark web, though. In fact, I started using it more. I knew that if there was any way I was going to find my brother's kidnapper, it wasn't going to be using the old-fashioned police detective model. I had to track Noisy down once he decided to stalk again. So I created various fake identities on numerous dark net markets and made posting after posting for birthday party clowns to come perform at my son's party. Then, finally, after several weeks of doing this, I got a response. Only it wasn't from Noisy. It was from another old man dressed as a clown who included a picture of himself in the posting with his response. The weirdest thing was, the old man had a cleft lip and looked just like my little brother. Only he had aged at least 50 years. I was really freaked out by this and had to know more. But after I posted several times for him to meet me, I think he could tell I was trying to trick him, because he would never show up. I am going to continue to look for him as long as I can, but I think he knows it's me, and for some reason, he doesn't want to be found.
My twin sister Anna got married to her fiancé Josh a few days ago. Anna and I have been inseparable always. She's my best friend. I was over the moon when Anna told me that she was engaged. When she asked me to be her maid of honor, I was almost as happy as she must have been when Josh asked her to marry her. On the day of the wedding, I had a doctor's appointment and went straight to the church from there. When I arrived, I met up with the other bridesmaids. I was surprised to see that they weren't wearing the pink dresses Anna had picked out. Instead, they were all wearing long black dresses. I was still wearing jeans and a blouse, and Lillian, one of Anna's friends, asked rudely, "You're gonna change, right?" I told her of course I was. I brought my dress with me. When I got back in my dress, they all looked at me in shock. Lillian snapped at me. "What the f*** do you think you're doing?" I was so confused. Though I was supposed to be maid of honor, the bridesmaids would not let me talk to Anna at all. Instead of being with my sister on her wedding day, I had to sit in the back of the church. Even our mother agreed that I was not to go to the front wearing the dress. I honestly don't remember much of the ceremony. I was ashamed about apparently wearing the wrong dress, so I just sat in the back and kept my head down. All I remember is everyone crying a lot. When we arrived at my parents' house for the reception, I went to the fridge to get some beer I had bought. Now, I know that beer is not exactly festive, but it was the brand Anna and I had drunk together when I turned 18. My parents caught us back then and were really angry, but I thought everyone would find it funny now. I was sure Anna would. However, when my mom saw me with the beers, she grabbed them from me and angrily told me that I was disrespecting Anna. I said that I was sure that Anna would find it funny. My mom replied that I was out of line. I know that a wedding is a serious thing, but everyone was so solemn. You're supposed to have fun too, right? Everyone at the reception was acting strange around me, like I had done something really wrong. Every time I tried to talk to someone, they just left me standing there. Some people even seemed to look at me pitifully for some reason, but they would still not talk to me. The worst thing was that Anna kept avoiding me too. She looked really glum, which was strange because she had been looking forward to her wedding so much. She seemed to be making the rounds, but I never saw her talking to anyone. I finally decided to confront her. I told her that I was sorry about the dress, but that she hadn't told me about the change and I didn't know what I had done wrong. She didn't answer, but looked at me with a look of disdain that she has never given me before. I then asked her why she wasn't with Josh and whether anything had happened between them that was upsetting her. She told me, "I'm not here for Josh. I'm here for you." I have no idea what that was supposed to mean. There was one thing that happened a few days before the wedding that I should mention. Anna didn't want a bachelorette party, but her, me, and a couple of friends went to get drinks to celebrate a little. That evening, I really messed up. I was to be designated driver. At first, I only drank virgin coladas. The others were getting more and more drunk though, and they seemed to have a lot more fun than I did. I thought that 1 or 2 cocktails wouldn't hurt. The others were too drunk to realize what I ordered. At the end of the night, I was more tipsy than I realized and ended up crashing Anna's car. Fortunately, nothing major happened. Anna only got a few scratches and I bumped my head pretty badly, but other than that, we did not have any injuries. Anna was really mad at first, but I thought she would have gotten over it by the wedding. My parents were really mad at me too after the incident. They cried a lot after the police told them what had happened. I think they were really disappointed in me. Josh came over that night too. Even he cried. I think he was really upset that my sister got hurt, even though her injuries weren't bad. I still feel really guilty about drinking and driving, and maybe the accident is the reason why everyone is acting so weird around me. Maybe Anna is still mad about it, but I feel she could have told me that instead of not telling me about the change of dresses, and then being angry that I didn't know about it. The worst thing happened after I went to bed after the reception. I had just fallen asleep when Anna came to my room. She was still wearing her wedding dress. The white fabric almost seemed to glow in the darkness of the room. There were dark stains on her dress. By the looks of it, she had spilled red wine down the front. I think she must have been drunk because she started talking about how I had ruined everything, how it was all my fault. Now she would make me regret it for the rest of my life. Her face was distorted with rage. It almost looked unhuman. I was in shock. Her voice sounded weirdly raspy. Anna is a stress smoker, so I guess she had gotten drunk on wine and smoked a few cigarettes. I started crying and asking her what she meant. She let out an unearthly shriek and jumped at me. She raised her hand as though to hit me, and I instinctively closed my eyes. But she must have missed me because all I could feel was a gush of cold air on my face. When I opened my eyes again, she had left. I woke up several times during the night and heard her wailing every time. Not just crying, wailing. The next night, she suddenly stood next to my bed. She was just standing there, wailing and showing no reaction when I tried to talk to her. I must somehow have fallen back to sleep with her standing there. I don't remember her leaving, just that she was suddenly gone. Since then, she has come to my room every night. Every time she wears her stained wedding dress. I don't know why she's tormenting me. I've been meaning to talk to her about it during the day, but she's always left the house before I get up. She just comes to my room at night, berating me, crying, and telling me that she will never let me have peace again. I told my parents about her behavior, but they refused to have a talk with her. They even said that I was imagining it. They said that I had to understand that Anna was not here anymore. I told them that I knew she lived in an apartment with Josh now, but that she obviously came to our house every night. I'm really frustrated that they don't believe me. I don't want to go to bed tonight. To be honest, I'm terrified of Anna. This happened to me during the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016 until I moved due to the fear of living alone in my apartment. Slight backstory. I'm a 22-year-old British female and have been living in Japan since April 2015. The apartment I first lived in was rented out by a company connected to my school. It was not a good apartment at all, but at the time I didn't know what the general quality and size versus price of Japanese apartments were, and I got given 1 out of 5 that I chose before I moved. The apartment was seriously tiny, 1 room, kitchen connected, and bed about 2 steps away from it. I could walk the length of my whole apartment in about 10 steps, but I was excited because it was my first time living alone and in a country I'd previously only dreamt about living in. After about a month of living and studying in Japan, I met my ex-boyfriend. He told me that the area I lived in was not a good one and known for inhabiting creepy people, so warned me not to walk alone at night anymore, or if I did, then to not wear headphones and be wary. I kicked myself for the countless times I'd walked the 30-minute journey home from the clubs while really drunk after hearing this. Japan is a generally really safe country, but not so much for females that are alone. Anyway, into the story. I'd been living there for 6 months when my best friend returned to England and moved out. He lived on my right. This left me a little scared because I had noticed previously that the neighbor on my left was a bit odd. He would constantly clear his throat as if he was coughing up a f***ing hairball or something. He didn't live immediately next to me, but down the hall, so when I exited my room and looked left, his door was in view. On the left were stone stairs going up to nothing. I was on the top floor, and if you went past the stairs, you'd be standing outside his door, and on the left is more hallway and stairs going down. I only took these stairs to do my washing, shared machines on the bottom floor. Otherwise, I always used the stairs on my right at the end of the hall because the stairs leading to the washing machines were always full of spiders. So my friend moved out, and after that, I noticed this guy a lot more. At this point, I'd never seen his face, but I know when he was out or in his place in the evenings due to the light that would yellow his peephole if it was on. My peephole was smashed by a previous tenant, so if he looked at mine, he wouldn't be able to tell if I was in or not, luckily. He still cleared his throat all the time, and despite having space between us, it was loud enough to sound like it was coming from outside my door. That's how loud he did it. To be fair though, our walls were crazy thin. I didn't think much of him until I started noticing that when I went outside my door to smoke, in clear view if he were to look through his peephole, his light would suddenly turn off. The previously yellow peephole would go black. I didn't think too deeply about it since I would usually go out at night and maybe he just decided to go to bed and I coincidentally saw it every time. Anyway, one day I went out front for a cigarette, saw his peephole go black. I stared at it while I smoked, trying to pick up any changes in light to confirm or disprove my theory that he hadn't turned the light off and it was in fact blackened out by his own face. I was stood up this time for some reason. I usually sat down, but I had a weird feeling this day and stayed standing. I forgot to mention that our doors are metal, so opening and closing them makes a really loud noise. I stubbed out my cigarette and put it in my ashtray when I noticed him open his door and start coming out. I was on high alert, so a bit panicked, but I thought, he's probably just taking his trash out or something. Then I went cold as I noticed he wasn't holding anything at all. He just stood there, facing me. I turned slowly and as naturally as possible to go into my apartment as he started walking past hall to the stairs and towards my apartment. The path was straight, so if he was intending on walking past me, he'd have to keep his feet straight. But he didn't. His walk was angled towards me, and the space between our doors was less than 3 meters. I opened my door and he suddenly started to walk much faster. I got round my door and entered, closing it, and just had enough time to see him lurch towards my door as I slammed it shut and locked it. He stopped outside. I couldn't see him because of my broken peephole, but I didn't hear him keep going past my door or going back to his, so I knew he was right there on the other side. I was listening intently. I saw my handle very slightly jiggle. He was trying to open my door with knows what intentions. I waited for maybe 30 seconds before I heard him finally turn and walk back to his place, and the door closed. I was extremely panicked at this point, so I called my male school friend and explained everything. He asked if I wanted him to come over, but he lived pretty far from me, and it was already late, so I told him I'd be okay, and he stayed on the phone with me for a while as I calmed down. During our conversation, he asked me to open my door and close it to see if the guy would come out again. I did, opening and closing it hard, listening intently. And to no surprise, I heard his door open and close again after he probably paused and stared, wondering why he'd heard my door but not seen me. After this, I was so scared to be in my apartment at night or go out for cigarettes, I started testing it. Leave my room silently, smoke, his peephole wasn't black when I went out silently, thus confirming that it had been him watching me as I smoked all the times before, then close my door normally after I was done and listen. Sure enough, every time I closed mine, I'd hear his open. Occasionally heard him come to my door and just stand there, probably listening for a sign if I was in or not. One night I was out smoking and the creep came home as I was there. I was frozen still, staring at him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't even open his door at first, just stood staring at it for way longer than normal. I'd almost finished my cigarette when he finally opened it and went in. Another thing that I can't 100% say was him, but I'm pretty sure. Sometimes I would smoke in the stairwell when it was raining because the rain would hit me when I stood outside my door. I smoked, put my cigarette in my ashtray. It was kind of smelly, so I left it there on the stairwell. Third step, same one I habitually sat on when I smoked there. Left it tucked in the corner by the wall and went inside, closing my door normally and went to bed. I knew the people that lived on my right, 1 to 3 doors down. We all used the second stairwell when we went out, not the one I was sat on, and I know for a fact they don't smoke. On the left of my creepy neighbor's room was a Chinese couple that I didn't know. They and the creep always used the stairs that led down to the washing machines. The stairs I was sat on, as I said before, aren't used because they go up to nothing and they aren't even visible unless you walk around a corner. My room was on the corner, these steps connected to it. See pic if confused. Anyway, I go back the next morning to get my ashtray, and not only was it now a couple steps up and in the middle, there was a cigarette butt and scrunched up packet of cigarettes. Same brand that I smoke. I don't know if it was him, but that stairwell is only easily visible to us. This was all happening over in months of 2015 and beginning of 2016. The thing that convinced me to finally move out was the following. I'd been out for dinner with my boyfriend and we got back after 11. To enter the gate at my apartment after 11 p.m., you need a key as they lock it. I was walking faster than my boyfriend, turned a corner leading to my apartment and saw a figure stood in the darkness near the gate, waiting and watching me approach. He started to appear from the shadows, away from the apartment and towards me. My boyfriend turned the corner, and as soon as this guy noticed him, he pulled his phone out and quite clearly pretended to talk to someone on it. My boyfriend and I walked past and he slowly followed. I didn't realize at this point that it was my creepy neighbor, but we were silent, both wary of the situation. As I got to the gate, I noticed that it was locked and started searching in my bag for my keys. The guy came up, said excuse me, and nonchalantly opened the gate and stood on the other side. I'd found my keys by this point and was holding them ready to lock the gate again, but the guy was stood as if he was waiting to see if my boyfriend would enter with me or not. I showed him my keys, said thank you, and that I'd locked the gate. He reluctantly left before my boyfriend had come in, and we watched him go up the stairs but didn't see which apartment he went to. When I saw he'd used the washing machine stairs, it clicked that it was my creepy neighbor, and I told my boyfriend. We went up the same stairs slowly. I went first and peered around the corner to where my neighbor lived. He was stood there, waiting, staring at his door but not opening it. He noticed me come around and turned to me, staring until he saw my boyfriend and then went inside abruptly. This was the last incident I could handle. I knew he was up to something no good and I didn't want to wait for anything else to happen, so I decided after that to cancel my contract and move out. Had to pay a fair amount to do it too. Until the day I moved, he still did creepy things. I'd hear him outside my door or see the black peephole and know he was staring at me. So, creepy, over excessively throat clearing guy, let's not ever meet again. Okay, let's get one thing straight right off the bat. I'm a good person. I mean, I'm not a great person. I'm not the Pope of Mother Frickin' Teresa. Nobody's going to canonize me after I'm gone, but I do my best. I say good morning to people at work. I bring in donuts occasionally. Last week, I even offered to help an old lady clear some snow off her car. It's hard to think of more examples right now, but just take my word for it. I'm a decent person. Anyways, there's this guy on my drive home from work. He's not far from where I live, and I pass by him almost every day. In the winter, every so often, I'll roll down my car window and pass a couple bucks out to him. At least, I meant to. I saw other people doing it all the time, so I figured he was okay. He was getting by, I thought, even if he did look pretty cold. Pretty desperate and disheveled, wrapped up in a blanket and shivering all the time. If I'd known the truth, I would have done more. I don't usually carry cash. Mostly everything is debit these days, and if I do have a bit of coinage, I need to save it for the coin-operated washing machine I use to do my laundry. It's hard to find change these days, after all. Like I said, I meant to do more. I wanted to do more, but I didn't. Maybe that's why this is happening to me. Anyways, when I opened my back car door yesterday morning at 6 a.m. to throw my work bag inside, I recognized him right away. It had been a cold night, the temperature dropping to 30 below freezing. Even for Canada, that's cold. There he was in the backseat of my car, dead from exposure. His beard was coated in icicles, and his skin was slightly blue in the dim light of the morning. He wasn't moving, and he wasn't breathing. I shook him, trying to see if he would wake up, if maybe he was just sleeping, but he was definitely dead. After calling 911, the police and ambulance came and took him away. I told the cops what I knew, and they said it wasn't my fault. These things happen more often than most people would believe. Lock up the car next time, the shorter cop said, and get an alarm system, then this won't happen. I muttered something in agreement, thinking him a bit heartless. Part of me didn't mind the guy using my car to sleep, especially if it was helping him stay alive in the cold weather. More than anything else, I felt bad I hadn't done more to help him. I felt an immense guilt, like a hand gripping my heart and squeezing it tightly. The shorter cop walked away, and the other one stayed behind and looked at me sympathetically. "Don't mind him," he said. "The guy's own wife hates his guts. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. It's too bad about this guy, though. I'm sure somebody out there will miss him. I'll try to find out who they are, and I'll let them know what happened here. He doesn't have any ID, but maybe someone will recognize him, or we can match his prints. Thanks for calling us." The cop started to walk away, and I went back to my car. I got in and began to drive towards my job at the hospital. It was light out by that point, and I had to explain my tardiness to my manager, but when I told people what had happened, they quickly forgave me, and I got a lot of sympathetic looks. That made me feel even guiltier. I didn't deserve sympathy, I thought, not after I had done nothing to help the man while he was alive. When I drove home that evening, it was dark outside once again, and I heard something rustling around in the back seat. The car was moving along at a steady speed with traffic on all sides, so I couldn't exactly stop to look around. I thought it was just the sound of junk shifting around back there for a few moments since I had left my basketball in the car and it tended to roll around. But then a hand gripped my shoulder, icy cold and blue. It gripped my trapezius, pinching and twisting, causing me to jerk the steering wheel to the side and swerve in pain and fright. The driver in the car beside me honked, rolled down his window, and gave me the finger, cursing at me. I had other concerns, though, like the familiar blue-tinged face staring at me in the reflection of the rearview mirror. Holy shit! You're that dead homeless guy from my trunk! His emaciated face stared back at me in the mirror. His grin showed yellowed and missing teeth, and his skin was pulled taut over prominent cheekbones, making him look skeletal and terrifying. His blue-tinged skin reflecting even bluer in the flickering streetlight's glow. "You know, person experiencing homelessness is actually the preferred term these days," he said. "It's less stigmatizing. Nobody likes to be put in a box." No pun intended. "What do you want from me?" I asked, almost screaming at him. My heart was pounding wildly, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. The road seemed to blur in and out of focus in front of me. "I'm not sure yet," he said, considering this. "I'm just not ready to move on. It's like something is keeping me here." "What's that?" "Hell if I know. Wish I could say. Maybe it's you." "Me? What'd I do? You just happened to die in my car." "Uh-huh. Right. So you didn't drive past me every day on that street corner and ignore me? I'd still be alive if I'd had a few bucks to buy a coffee at McDonald's, you know. That's what I used to do to warm up, but they don't let you sit inside unless you buy something. Sometimes I'd hop on a bus, sit at the back until they kicked me off. I relied on the kindness of strangers for spare change to get by, but not strangers like you. Never people like you." I was silent for a few seconds. "Why didn't you get a job? There's plenty of them out there." "Excuse me, you're asking the dead guy why he isn't employed. Sorry, maybe that's a rude question." "You're right. It is a rude question." Silence ensued for a few long seconds. "You think I didn't try? Nobody wants to hire a bum. You've got no address, no phone number, red flags for any employer. It reads unstable. And I did have a job, just so you know. I was a bricklayer until my wife left me and I started drinking to cut the pain. She was the only good thing in my life, the only thing that kept me going, and when she left, it was like I lost everything. And then, before I knew it, I really did lose everything. I couldn't get my shit together and my boss fired me. Then I lost my house in the divorce. My kid stopped talking to me. You have a kid? Had a kid. I had a kid. Past tense. Remember? What about shelters? I asked, genuinely curious now. Why didn't you stay there to get out of the cold? You sure do know everything, don't you? Hell, I never heard of a homeless shelter before. What's that? I could tell he was being snide, so I didn't say anything. This was one sarcastic ghost, but at least he wasn't trying to kill me. Not yet, anyways. You know, the thing about the shelters is you're only allowed to sleep there, and even then only for so long. The limit at the one in town here is 3 months. They're always over capacity nowadays, so there's no exceptions like there used to be. I went over my 3 months, they kicked me out. Gotta make space for the next guy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought the system was better than that, more forgiving and kinder. Man, I'm sorry. If I'd known, you would have flipped me a quarter now and then. A long silence sat between us again, and there was no sound in the car except for the hum of the tires and the other traffic going past outside. I want to try to make it up to you. How can I do that? I asked. The cops said they'd try to find your family, so who's your son? I'll find him and I'll give him a message for you. Whatever you want to tell him. Your wife too. He seemed to think about this for a little while, but then he made a discontented sound. No, I don't think so. They abandoned me. I told them both I was dying on the street, and they didn't lift a finger to help. Forget it. I'll stay back here. It was a comfortable enough spot, only a little cold. You can just get used to me. Or not. By that point, I had finally pulled into the parking spot outside my building. Realizing he wasn't going to let me help him, I turned the car off and got out, gratefully leaving him behind. He stared at me from the back seat, watching me go, his cracked, blue-lipped grin never faltering, his eyes never dropping. I can't get rid of him. It doesn't matter what I do. During the day, he isn't visible, but at night, he scares the hell out of me every time I drive the car. I begin to think maybe he's left, but then he grips my shoulder tightly, painfully, and speaks raspily in my ear. You can't get rid of me now. You thought I was annoying before when I came to your window at the red lights. I saw you roll your eyes at me, ignoring my suffering. Well, you can't ignore me anymore. What do you want from me? I scream at him again and again when he scares me like this. He always says the same thing. We all mourned his death, even my mom and dad. He was like the perfect son-in-law for them, always attending to their needs and whatnot. On September 5th, 2020, Bruce got hit by a truck while attempting to rescue a baby sparrow that had fallen on the road. He breathed his last breath in my arms while I screamed at him to hold on a little longer. My only wish was to see him smile at me one last time. Little did I know that my wish would come true 1 year after his death. My name is Rachel and I'm 25. My boyfriend's passing dealt a huge blow to me and I thought I would never recover from it. It wasn't until I met Andrew who was able to fill up that hole that had been created in my heart. He helped me through this hard phase and I ended up marrying him on September 3rd, 2021, just 2 days before the date that marked 1 year of my old boyfriend's death. That night at around 11 p.m., I was looking at the moon from my bedroom window, sipping a cup of tea. I was thinking how Andrew had changed my life for the better, and the thought brought a smile on my face. I took another sip and looked at the neighboring houses. Everyone had mostly gone to bed, and only the streetlights outside brought any source of light. I set the empty cup on the table and was about to go to bed when I noticed someone standing in the porch of the house exactly opposite ours. It was pretty dark outside, and I could only make out an opaque shape. I squinted my eyes to see if I could penetrate the darkness to get a better look at the person, but to no avail. I could tell that whoever it was looking directly at my bedroom window. I was feeling uneasy, so I called out to Andrew, who was busy in the study working on his project. "What is it, dear? Do you need something?" His head popped into the doorway. "Not really. There is someone standing outside the house opposite us, and he's giving me these weird vibes," I said. "It must be our neighbor, Frank. He usually forgets where he keeps his door keys when he goes out." "I'm not sure. The guy is facing directly towards our house." "Let me have a look," said Andrew as he made his way to the window. The guy hadn't moved since I last saw him. He was still in darkness, so making out his face was still difficult. I'll give Frank a call to see if he is... Andrew was cut short when a car passed by and its headlights revealed the person who was standing there. My mouth dropped open as I realized who it was. The person standing there had brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a black t-shirt. It was Bruce, and he had the biggest grin on his face. I took a step back, trying to process what I had seen. That was definitely Bruce standing there, but how was he alive? Rachel, didn't you say that Bruce got hit by a truck and died afterwards? Asked Andrew. His eyes still hadn't left Bruce. I was too stunned to answer. I clearly remember that I was there when he was buried. I even went to his grave several times after. I know you won't lie to me about something like this, but that Bruce looks far from dead to me, stated Andrew. His voice wasn't angry. He sounded confused. I had shown Andrew a picture of Bruce once, so that's why he recognized him. I escaped a glance outside the window, and sure enough, Bruce was still standing there. He hadn't moved an inch. Andrew drew the curtains so that we don't have to look at Bruce's smiling face. I'm calling the cops on him, he said as he dialed in the number. I think we shouldn't. He's not doing anything. I somehow managed to find my voice. Andrew looked in the direction of the window and sighed. If he continues this weird act tomorrow, then I'm letting the cops deal with him. For now, let's just get to bed. I nodded in agreement and went to bed with him. Tomorrow morning, Bruce was gone. I was relieved that he was gone. It must have been our imagination or something, because Bruce was dead and we couldn't have possibly seen him last night. Or so I thought. The day went on normally. Andrew spent the day talking to travel agents and booked us a trip to Hawaii for the 6th of September for our honeymoon. I spent most of the time packing our luggage and completely forgot the events of last night. After dinner, I went to my room to open the window to let in some fresh air. I pushed open the curtains and almost screamed. Bruce was standing next to our fence directly under a streetlight. He had moved from yesterday's position and was much closer to our house now. Just like yesterday, he had a giant smile on his face. He stood there, never blinking an eye. I shouted and called for Andrew. He came running in, and seeing Bruce from the window, he quickly took out his phone. That's it, you creep. I'm calling the cops. I stepped away from the window, my heart racing now. A few minutes later, we heard the doorbell. It was the cops. Andrew explained to them about Bruce and them both to where Bruce was standing. I watched all of this from the window. Officer, I would like you to arrest this creep. He has been stalking us since yesterday, said Andrew, who pointed at Bruce. The police officers looked in the direction of Bruce, having a confused expression on their face. Look, son, are you trying to pull a prank on us? You do know such things could get you in real trouble, stated one of the policemen. If not, then I suggest you to stop drinking at this hour. It causes your mind to go bananas so you imagine stuff, said the other. I stared in horror. What do they mean by that? Don't they see Bruce standing right next to them? Andrew was just as confused as I was. Officer, the man I'm talking about is right next to you. Arrest him. Look, son, I already told you that such pranks are no good. If you wanted to make us waste our time, then at least make up something good, warned the policeman. Let's get moving, Drew. Kids these days, said the other. Both officers went back to their car and drove away. The most frightening part of this entire exchange was that Bruce hadn't moved an inch during it. He kept his eyes towards me, completely disregarding what was going on around him. He had a giant smile on his face throughout. Look here, if you come to my house again, you'll regret it, warned Andrew. Bruce, once again, acted as if he hadn't heard a thing. He kept his gaze fixed on me. Andrew came back inside in complete disbelief. I have no idea what's going on. Why did the officers think I was going crazy when Bruce was right in front of them? Andrew kept on mumbling. I drew the curtains, taking one last look outside. Bruce was standing exactly where he was, smiling. Night went and morning came. Today was the day when Bruce had died exactly a year ago. Due to the recent events, I was scared to go and visit his grave. Me and Andrew discussed about last night's events, that how the police officers completely ignored Bruce, like he wasn't even there. We came up with no logical explanation for it, so we gave up. We finished packing for our honeymoon after that. That night, I was terrified to even go near the window. We made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Andrew went outside the room to recheck the door locks. I was a bit curious, so I went to the window to get a peek outside. I lifted the curtain and screamed. Bruce was standing directly outside the window, smiling. Andrew came running in and pulled me away from the window. I was shaking terribly at this point.
My scream must have been really loud because a few neighbors came over to check in on us. We told them about Bruce and his weird smiling. They went to check that area, and to our utter shock, they too completely ignored Bruce, who was standing in plain sight. It seemed like only me and Andrew were able to see. Once again, Bruce showed no interest in the people around him and kept his gaze at the window. The neighbors went back after a few minutes. They must have thought we were going crazy. That night, we hardly slept. We had no idea if Bruce would try anything since he was directly outside our house. Both of us kept watch. Morning came by slowly. Andrew parted the curtain, and Bruce gone by that time. We had our flight in a few hours, so we made our way to the airport. Both me and Andrew were super sleepy, so we decided to sleep on the plane. We boarded the plane and found our seats. Let's start our new life from this moment onwards. The last few days were weird, and I want to leave that behind, said Andrew. I nodded in agreement, satisfied. Andrew took out an eye mask and quickly dozed off. I was surprised by Andrew's ability to sleep so quickly. The plane was about to take off. I took one last look outside the window and felt like my heart stopped. Standing next to the ground marshal was Bruce, and he was smiling.
Some people have a normal job. Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week, health benefits, bonuses each year, retirement funds. Well, not me. I don't have a normal job. It's not easy doing what I do, but it pays the bill since I can't get a regular job due to my criminal record. I'm a janitor that works for the dark web, and I clean up murder rooms once the buyers are done torturing and killing the victims they paid for. I've been doing it for the past 3 years. Every time someone needs help cleaning up the bloody mess they made, I go in and clean up. I make sure there's not a single drop of blood in the room and dispose of the leftover body parts any way I could. No evidence remaining, no questions asked. In fact, I can never ask any questions. I just get paid to do my job and go home like it's nothing. It's a sick job, but they would pay me very good. But all that would change one night when I started to finally question my morality. It was one night when they called me to do a job. It's always at the same location, which is 40 miles from where I live in a rundown warehouse. I was called to clean up a room which really was no problem at all, but I noticed or barely caught on to something that I never thought twice about. As I was cleaning the room that was covered in blood, I saw a small picture on the floor. I picked it up, and it was a picture of a little girl, probably around 14 years old. This made me think right away that this was probably the victim whose blood I was cleaning up just now. It gave me an uneasy feeling inside, and for the first time kind of disturbed me just for the fact that these people are now using kids as their victims. But again, this was a job where no questions are asked. I put the picture in my pants pocket and continued cleaning. Once I was done, I packed up my things and quickly got out of the warehouse. I went inside my car and instantly I got a call. It was them. They always call private. I answered and they asked me if I was done cleaning up. I told them yes and that I had just gotten into my car. They then told me that they left the money inside my glove compartment while I was inside cleaning, and they'll probably have another job for me in the next 2 days since they have a customer who's already waiting. I knew I shouldn't have done this, but I decided to ask how old she was, referring to the victim. They hung up the call. I'm sure they were pissed just with me asking. I didn't know if I could continue doing these types of jobs anymore, but I didn't know how else I would get out of this without some possible threat to my life. I got the picture of the little girl and put it resting on the passenger side. I went home that night contemplating everything. It was the next day around 9 o'clock at night when I got a private call. I knew it was them and I was tempted not to answer, but I did anyway. They gave me the same location again and to be there around 4 a.m. tonight. This time, no questions asked. Juan Miguel Santos of 3905 in 16th Street. The call hung up. This was a clear threat. Just do my job and get out of there. I would need to leave town the next morning and disappear after this. I arrived at the location and saw there was an old Grand Marquis parked outside. Usually there shouldn't be any cars but mine at the location, and got worried that maybe these people are keeping a close eye on me. I stepped outside my car and walked slowly inside, feeling more and more paranoid with each step I took. The hallways were darker than before, and I saw a light come from the room I was supposed to go in. I entered inside and my eyes couldn't believe what they had just seen. There was a girl in the middle of the room, tied up and gagged to a chair. Alive. The job wasn't done yet, but then I saw the body of a man laying right on the floor next to the girl, that looked to be around 16 years old. The girl began to scream at me, and I started freaking out even more. I ran to the man on the floor and checked his pulse. He was gone. This was the man that was going to kill this girl, since I saw a scalpel on his right hand. I walked myself outside into the hallway and immediately got a call, private. It was them. Is everything okay? They knew something was up. They also had cameras in the hallways, but not in the rooms. They must have seen that I was nervous. Yes, everything's okay. Finish the job and get out. We'll leave the money in your car. They hung up, but I knew they knew something was wrong. I went back inside the room and the girl was yelling at me to help her with the gag in her mouth. I didn't know what to do. I needed to dispose of her body, but that meant I needed to kill her first. I looked around inside the man's bag and he had several weapons and tools inside, presumably to use to torture the girl. I pulled out a power drill and turned it on. The girl started to scream even more, telling me to stop. She was crying her eyes out. I aimed the power drill at her face and more tears started to run down her face. I put the power drill down. I couldn't do it. I took off her gag and asked what had happened. She told me that the man just fell on the floor and seemed like he had a heart attack. You know that I can't let you out of here. These are dangerous people and there are cameras everywhere inside this building. We both looked around the room. What about him? Asked the girl. I looked at the man and saw he had a hoodie. I took it off and gave it to the girl. Put this on and cover yourself and run as far as you can away from here. I'm scared. What if they find me? The girl said. I looked inside the man's pockets and found some car keys. They must have been for the car that was parked outside. Here, take these keys. I think the car that's parked outside belongs to him. Whatever you do, do not go to the police. They will find you and they will kill you. Just go as far away from here as possible. Before she left, I asked for her name and she said it was Crystal and that she was 17 years old. I was scared for her. I knew they might have even been outside waiting for me to finish. Before she stepped outside, I looked around the lot to see if it was clear for her to go. There were only but 2 cars outside and she quickly ran to the marquee. She said thank you and took off. I went back inside and quickly got my things. My phone started to ring. It was them. I ignored it and quickly ran to my vehicle. As soon as I was to take off, a car was approaching from behind me. The car parked right behind me and 2 men in masks stepped out. Not only that, but they opened the back seat of the car and took out Crystal. They caught her. They knew everything we had done. I should have taken off. One of the men took out a gun, pointed it at me, and told me to step outside my vehicle. I stepped out and they wanted for me to go inside. They took me and Crystal into the room with the client's dead body. I knew what they were going to do to us. Crystal couldn't stop whining and moping. This is what happens when you try and be a hero. I needed to do something before we would be dead bodies right next to the one that's already on the floor. I saw that Crystal was right beside the switch to the lights. I looked at her and signaled my eyes to the switches to turn them off. The moment Crystal turned off the lights, I ran towards one of the masked men. Gunshots fired as the men were yelling to turn on the lights. I grabbed the power drill that was on the floor and drilled it right into the man's chest. I stuck the drill all the way in and didn't stop till I heard the man gurgling, choking from his own blood. I got off him and heard Crystal breathing hard and yelling. I turned on the lights and witnessed Crystal stabbing the other masked man repeatedly with a scalpel in the face. Half of his mask was gone from the punctures. I got Crystal and told her to stop. She was frightened, terrified. She hugged me tight and began to cry. Both of us had made it out alive this time. We walked over to my car and took off, both of us covered in blood. The sun was coming out as it was already 6:30 in the morning. We both needed to change our identities, and I knew a guy who could do it that I met from jail, and drove over to his place right away. Sometimes I do think that maybe it would have been better off if both of us were dead, since we would now have to live in fear for the rest of our lives. Luckily, I haven't heard or seen of anything, but you never know. These people always manage to find you. Let's hope they don't catch me now, or for the rest of my life.
I lived in Japan for around 10 months a couple of years back as part of a study abroad program as my placement year for university. I lived in Hiroshima and pretty much every Japanese person I met was exactly how you would expect them, generous and respectful. All except this one old lady who just so happened to live in the apartment next to me. It was about a month after I'd been in Japan, originally from Northern Ireland, so it was quite an adjustment to make, when our group of gaijins decided we were going to go to the Saijo Sake Festival. For those who don't know, this is a huge sake or rice wine drinking festival that, from what I now understand, everyone goes and gets extremely drunk at. As men of fine taste and culture, we sampled many different kinds of sake from all over Japan and got rode off beyond belief. Then we all got the train back home, back to our apartments. I can't remember shit all apart from calling my girlfriend at the time and passing out on my futon. Normal stuff. Skip to 6 a.m. the next morning when my loudest doorbell wakens me up. Keep in mind, my apartment is extremely small, so the noise is extremely loud. I check the time and am confused as anything, but assume it's just my friend from downstairs who wants to talk about last night. I look through the peephole in my door and see a police officer standing there. First thought that goes through my mind is, Taylor, what the have you done when you were drunk last night? But at the same time, I was so sure I just fell asleep right away. I talked to the dude using a translation app, and he basically tells me there's been a noise complaint. Strange, considering the fact that all I did was make a phone call and fall asleep. Anyway, the guy sees how confused I am and kinda just sees there must have been a mistake and leaves. I'm honestly still drunk and just super confused, but the day carries on as normal. Next morning, 6 a.m. doorbell rings. I already kind of assumed what it was gonna be this time, and what do I see through the peephole this time? 2 police officers. Same convo goes down, and I convince them that there's been no noise. I literally walked them into my apartment to show them how I fell asleep watching Netflix. They tell me at this point it's the neighbor who I've never met is making the complaints. At this point, I think she's just a bitch or maybe racist. I asked the guy at my uni who takes care of all the foreign students about this, and he tells me that I'm getting moved apartments to a room on the floor below. I'm pretty pissed because I just settled in my new space, but whatever. He plans on coming tomorrow morning with the landlord to move my shit out and check my new room is okay. I went to sleep on good time that night and prepped for the people helping move my stuff out, so naturally at 3 a.m. I'm fast asleep, then suddenly ding 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 ding. My doorbell is just constantly ringing. It's deafening. It of course has woken me up straight away. I can't even begin to tell you how scared I was. I couldn't even move, didn't want to. After about a minute of what it felt like incessant noise, complete silence. I make my way over to the front door to look through the peephole and I see nothing, but I just know it's this psycho bitch neighbor. Nothing else happens that night and I eventually get back to sleep. I wake up the next morning still kinda shaken, but it's cool because my boys are coming around soon. I keep walking out the front to check if they're downstairs and quickly closing my door behind me because I don't know what this woman will try if she sees me. I walk into my room and the slide door to my balcony is open, and there I see her for the first time. She literally wrapped her body around the fence that separates our balconies whilst keeping her footing on her side and is just staring right at me. We stare at each other for a second and then she quickly whips back around onto her side. Literally 2 seconds later my doorbell rings and I'm just like, nah, that's not possible. Thank God it turns out to be the people to help me move my stuff, and I told them what's up and hastily moved downstairs to my new room. Outside of her turning up at my new room once and asking if the police came there, I was able to avoid her from then out. I guess the police decided to start ignoring her calls. So, crazy ass old lady, let's not meet. Last night, I decided to take my dog for a walk. I have a pair of cheap but surprisingly comfortable sandals that I've been wearing whenever I go out to grab the mail, walk my dog, or anything that doesn't require me to travel on foot for too long. On the way back home, after what had been a long but uneventful walk through the neighborhood, I was suddenly approached by a man on the sidewalk who, without introduction, commented that I have a very refined set of feet. Unsure of what exactly that meant and immediately creeped out, more so by his sudden appearance than the comment itself, I meekly thanked him and hurried my dog toward the house. I did not look back, fearing that the man would take my glance as an invitation to follow. I probably shouldn't have gone straight home, but it was late and I was tired. I heard no footsteps trailing my own and entered my house without further contact. The next day I found a letter on my front porch. The contents of the letter unaltered. I am the man who you met on the street last night. If you remember, I remarked that you have quite an impeccable pair of feet. I am willing to offer you $1,200 per hour if you allow me to study them. There will be no physical contact during this session, and you are free to leave at any time before the hour and still receive the full amount. But I assure you that there will be nothing unusual or strange about the session aside from, of course, the unusual nature of the request itself. I merely wish to study, measure, and photograph your feet. All from a distance, of course. If you would be interested, please call me at this number. Having just been unceremoniously demoted at work so as to allow my boss's son a managerial position, nepotism strikes again, I declared that I could tolerate being photographed and studied for an hour, if it resulted in leaving with $1,200 in my pocket. I called the number, received directions to a house in a much nicer neighborhood than my own, and drove out to meet the man for the session. His house was plainly innocently furnished, and I tried to suppress or at least ignore thoughts like, all serial killers have normal-looking houses. The man showed me to his sunlit living room, not a dimly lit basement, a pleasant surprise, where he'd set up a camera and recording equipment, and one of those really expensive massage chairs they use to aggressively advertise at malls. I was directed to sit, offered a beverage, which I of course declined, and at his prompting removed my shoes and socks. I sat for about 50 minutes, browsing random forums on my phone while the man took countless pictures of my bare feet. He was very focused throughout the session, only speaking to instruct me on positioning and angles. He took down notes in a spiral-bound notebook, but I could only make out the occasional word. Sentences and phrases were written in some language I didn't recognize. Aside from the somewhat odd color scheme of his outfit, dark brown khaki shorts and a purple t-shirt that had to be at least a decade old, he looked normal enough, and I assumed that the usage of a foreign language was for an added layer of privacy. An understandable precaution, considering the subject matter. As he'd promised in his note, the man did not touch me, merely gestured in the directions he wanted me to move my feet. There was the unexpected excitement in his eyes, which admittedly made me feel a bit nice, seeing someone so apparently enamored with me, even though the objects of their fascination were my feet. But there was also consternation in his face, or perhaps frustration, an expression not dissimilar to what you might see on the face of a student trying to solve a difficult problem. The last 10 minutes of the session were spent questioning me on my ambulatory habits. He asked about the kind of footwear I typically wore, where I usually walked, and for how long, and other somewhat strange, slightly scientific inquiries. But nothing sexual. His focus actually seemed more like that of a doctor than a fetishist. Before I could answer a question concerning my preference of sock length, white, nothing past the ankle, thank you very much, a timer went off, and he shut his notebook with a sigh. He then stood up, he'd been kneeling before me, and withdrew a stuffed envelope from his pocket. He handed it to me, then began shutting off his equipment. I would have pocketed the envelope, trusting by the size alone that it contained the $1,200, but he insisted that I count it, presumably to cement a trust that he'd probably later use to encourage me to schedule subsequent sessions. As I counted the money, divided into crisp $50 bills, I casually remarked, "You must really like feet, huh?" The man stopped mid-motion, his hand suspended over a light. He turned to face me, and I saw a new expression on his face. An expression of unrestrained revulsion. He carefully stepped around the equipment he had yet to put away, went to a tall bookcase against a nearby wall, and, incredibly, pushed it aside, revealing an alcove in the wall. In the alcove, resting on 3 different shelves, were 3 large jars filled with some kind of translucent green liquid, and floating within these jars were fleshy parts and pieces, apparently hewn off from some larger creature. Despite seemingly belonging to different species, there was a morphological commonness about the objects. They were all, I realized with a heart-pausing terror, rudimentarily grown or abnormally developed feet. I do not like feet. It's just the opposite. They disgust me. But if I am to remain here, if I am to blend in, then I must study and duplicate them. As you can see by the rest of my flawless appearance, they are the one aspect of human anatomy that I have yet to accurately, comfortably replicate. I've otherwise achieved perfect mimicry in all other aspects of human anatomy and physiology. Stepping away from the shelves but leaving them uncovered, he placed one of his feet on a nearby coffee table and carefully unfastened the laces of his shoes. I remembered finding it odd that he kept them on while within the home, but knew that some people walked around their houses with their shoes on, so I hadn't said anything. When the laces were undone, he removed the shoe, but instead of a sock-covered foot beneath, there was a heavily bandaged mass, roughly in the shape of a foot, but bearing several extensions and lumps that I knew were failed toe formations. But I was unfortunately not spared the uncertainty of speculation. He quickly unwound the bandages, through which some sickening yellow excretion had seeped, until a disgusting, sallow-skinned appendage was revealed. The would-be foot, the failed ambulatory extremity, had 6 of the malformed toes, 2 lumps on the topmost surface, 1 in the front, where they'd ordinarily be, while the rest rimmed the abdominal mass. Above the foot, instead of a seamless transition into the ankle, there was a revolting disparity in the tones of his skin. I screamed and recoiled away from the sight, nearly knocking over the camera's tripod. The man quickly reapplied the bandages, not bothering to replace the soiled wraps with fresh ones, and put his shoe back on. He remarked, almost absent-mindedly, that foot was the better one, that the other was in a much worse state, truly a travesty of design. I scrambled to my still bare feet, back against the wall, certain that I'd have to fight for my life now that I'd been shown his terrible, sickening secret. But the man went to his shelves, gazed solemnly into the jars therein for a moment, then returned the bookcase to its former position, hiding the severed, jar-suspended parts from sight, to tidying up his workspace, not at all surprised by the cowering foot model on the other side of the room. When he'd completely packed up his equipment, he brought it all into another room, then quickly returned with a steaming cup in his hands. He sipped, smiled in satisfaction, then looked at me with a raised brow expression which plainly asked, "Oh, you're still here?" Dumbfounded by the casualness of the last few minutes, I asked, Am I allowed to go?" He nodded, this time smiling at what might have to him sounded like an absurd question. I tried to regain some of my composure, a bit embarrassed, my somewhat dramatic, but still justified, reaction to the horrific things he'd presented to me. I awkwardly put my shoes back on while the man continued to sip from his cup and stroll around his living room. My nerves still buzzed, the shock and terror of the encounter not yet diluted by the apparent harmlessness of the mutated footman. I took one last glance at the man, making sure that he had not primed himself to assault me when I turned my back, but he'd seated himself in the chair I'd been sitting in, his legs propped up on the extendable footrest I hadn't known was there. He smiled, and I returned the expression, then went to leave. When I grasped the knob of the front door, the man called out behind me, "Feel free to give me a call if you'd ever like to let me study you again. I'll be more than happy to provide the same rate of payment. I'd even be willing to throw in a bit extra if you can return within the week. Once I've perfectly replicated the human foot, I can finally begin my plan. And trust me, you'll definitely want all the money you can get your hands on so you can distance yourself as far away from here as possible. Oh yes, you won't want to be anywhere near here." As I closed the door behind me, I heard a loud and eerily inhuman laugh issue from within the home, the tones almost bestial in modulation and carrying a sonic weight that made them clearly heard despite the distance and physical barriers between us. As I walked away from the house, the laugh seemed to follow me, only dying out when I rounded a corner. And even then, in those last few moments, it felt as if the undeniably inhuman voice took on a harsher, even more sinister pitch. A maniacal alien shriek that caused a nearby flock of birds to briefly disband, scattering wildly in their animal panic. Regardless of this last, admittedly monstrous revelation, I think I'll be back before the end of the week. And then, once I have enough money, I'll probably go on an extended vacation. Ivory Hollows was a brand new building that I moved into after I graduated from college. It was a huge monotone box that housed over 100 apartments. I liked it. I can't explain why, but the sight of the giant cube made me feel safe, secure. I enjoyed that every floor looked exactly the same. All the walls were gray, all the floors were black. Maybe it was my mathematics background, but it seemed like I fit in. As a bonus, I barely ever saw or heard my neighbors. It was like I was alone in a giant building. I loved the quiet. College life was always noisy, and people were always asking me for things, but in Ivory Hollows, I was like an integer, a number among many silent numbers. It was comforting. There was one glaring exception to the pattern. Every time I took the elevator, whether up or down, there was a man inside. He was a white man with dark hair that sat beneath a bowler cap. He was always wearing a silver suit fitted to his slender frame. I honestly would not have thought much of him except he was backward. In every trip he faced the back of the elevator as opposed to the front. I'd step in and stand awkwardly in the corner, face sort of sideways so I didn't have my back to him. Needless to say, it was unsettling. I am a person of rituals and norms. I don't break rules. I don't make a fuss, and I certainly don't stand backward in elevators. I talked it over with my cat. Should I say hello? Maybe he's blind and doesn't realize how to stand correctly. I could help him or something. She purred and rubbed against my hand. I scratched her absent-mindedly. Yeah, I'll say something tomorrow. Well, it took me 3 more days to talk myself up to it. My apartment was on the 10th floor, the highest floor of the building. I was ready for work and pressed the down button. The elevator reached me, and just like always, there was the man, his back to me. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. I took a few deep breaths. This might be awkward, but I needed to say something. I coughed and cleared my throat. Hello? The man did not respond. Excuse me, sir. He didn't move, but he did make a slight grunting sound. Me? Yes. Hello. My name is Tom. The man swayed a little. Tom, you say? I couldn't see his face, but he sounded old. Maybe he had dementia. What's your name, sir? He then started laughing. It was quiet at first, but it got loud quick. Without moving, he was full belly laughing. I inched away from him, glancing up at what floor we were on. I realized that we were still on floor 10. We hadn't moved. I pressed the lobby button again. Nothing happened. I pushed the door open button. Nothing. In desperation, I pressed to call for help, but it was no use. The man was still laughing. I pounded on the elevator doors. Hello? Help! We're stuck in here. The laughter suddenly stopped. Trust me, you do not want to open those doors. I was already trying to open them myself, using whatever strength I had to pry them apart even a little bit. I felt the man move closer to me. He backed up so his shoulders were nearly touching mine. This is your last warning. Just wait for it to go down. Get away from me! My hand slipped and I accidentally elbowed the man in the side. I swung around apologetically. He did not move. I went around to face him and apologize, but I stopped. Something small stuck out to me. There was cat hair on his suit. Do you know what stood here before Ivory Hollows? He turned his palms up. A house. A single house that belonged to an ordinary family. They owned the land, but they couldn't pay the bank, so it was sold. They kicked the family and put this ugly box on their beautiful home. Why would they destroy something so perfect? I bit my tongue. Was it your house? No. The family didn't have any money, so they ended up on the streets. The mom killed herself before this place was finished being built. The dad brought his young son here, and they hid in the construction site. Once it was clear that nothing was going to change, the dad took the boy to this very elevator. He slit the boy's throat right here on the floor. Not sure what happened to the dad. Maybe he's still here somewhere. Why are you telling me this? That's when the man turned his face to me. I stumbled backward, horrified. It was my face. This man looked exactly like me. Because they stopped all construction on this building the day after the boy was killed. Are you saying... This is an empty building, Tom. So why are you here? The doors opened suddenly, opened with a velocity I had never seen before. I ran out, dashing across the floor to my apartment. The halls were uncarpeted. The walls were unpainted. I opened the door to my home and found it completely empty. The only thing inside was a stray cat who hissed when I entered. I scoured the place looking for any evidence I had lived there. I found 2 things. A bloody knife and a bowler cap.